Welcome to the code review of the Wait and See mobile application. My name is LBrooks. I work as a software developer for Truist Bank, and I've been in that position for 24 years. I developed this application in the CS360 Mobile Architecture and Programming course that I took in August of 2022. That was nearly 2 years ago, and I really haven't looked at it since then. So I had to spend some time reviewing the code on my own um, to get back into what I previously understood. So we'll start with the software design and engineering category. I'll be using the checklist as a guide throughout each of these categories, but I won't duplicate items in the checklist for each category. So starting out software engineering, one of the first things I did was reorganize my files. They were all in the root package of the application, and I created some of these sub packages inside of a data package so I could organize my database files separately from the activity files. One thing that's different about Android Studio is this resource section. So these are where all your supporting files would be, and the XML files that build the front end screens of your application. This is a little bit different than what I'm used to on a day-to-day basis because I'm building applications that are written in HTML, and we use MVC style of ASP.NET applications. So we have a shell of HTML, and then I'm adding in my razor variables to match up to the particular classes. That's a little different than what's happening here because all of these files are storing the details of your layout and design separately. So for example, if I'm going to look at the registration screen, I see here everything's written in XML, so you have your text view object, your edit text object. A text view is just simply text that's written on the screen. Each of these have parameters you can add for the design and style of the field. And then those parameters can be called back to a string so that you can reuse them. Strings are stored over here under values. And it's really just a name and then the text that you would display in that string. There's also a section for arrays, and this would be used in times when I want to pull a collection of data from the database, maybe a list of weights, and then organize them in an array that I could then pull and display in a table view. So back on the registration XML design, you'll also see some links over to themes and colors. Those are found here. In themes, you can identify a particular variable to a color. That color is actually displayed here in the sidebar, so you know what you're pointing to. There's colors for your text, your different objects on the field, and also the background. And then all the colors are stored over here. So this type of development is a little bit different because normally my themes and colors would be all jumbled up together in some sort of style sheet file for an HTML application. This is different for me because it's separated into these different files that are then called as variables into your main front end screens. So that's an explanation of how the front end is built in an Android application. The other thing I've done is organize how the methods are called on some of these files. I've actually only gotten to the register activity as far as my enhancement goes, but I've made some changes here to identify what's happening, what methods are being called. Some of the methods are private, where I don't want them to be accessed except through the call of this page. So I've made those kind of changes already. Additionally, some of the commenting in particular was sparse, but I've added a sample here as a comment that I will continue to add for all the methods that I use throughout the application. And this is the style that I go with. I want to identify what the argument is and why it's being passed in. For example, this is just some existing information that may be passed from a previous screen. I then identify the calls that are being used in this particular method or class so that I know right at the top where things are. This helps with organization, and then a short little summary of what it does. For the onCreate method, this is essentially your main thread, and it runs first when the XML file is pulled. It's the first method that runs, and it includes things like initializing the database, setting your preferences, pulling in that front end design, setting your variables for all the form fields on the registration page, and then going into the click of the button. As you recall on the screenshot, there's a create account button. So once you've entered in all your information, you're clicking on the create account and it's moving forward. So in this, for the system design section or category, there are some loops and conditional statements that I've used in here. I'm going to explain those in the algorithms section, and also the defensive programming I'll explain in the database section. So the course objective that I'm hitting here on the software and design is titled Design, Develop, and Deliver Professional Quality Oral, Written, and Visual Communications that are coherent, technically sound, and appropriately adapted to specific audiences and contexts. So to align with that outcome, one of the items that I've already done is reorganizing the files so that they can be easily found in a logical way. This is very typical of a object-oriented application that's storing all your database objects together, your models together, and then your front-end screens or views. And then additionally, I have some deliverables that I'm working on. For example, I've already built a workflow to show how the application will work from start to finish, from login to logout. To quickly explain this, you're either logging in as an existing user or you move to the create account for new users. And from there, you just move forward until you get to your weight progress screen, which will display a list of previous weights that you've entered. If you haven't entered any, you can add a new weight. You can also edit a weight or delete a weight. And then these two sections here, I may not be able to get to due to time, so I will be removing those in the initial design enhancement list. But I will include a log out. And then for the database, there's a database, just a quick design of the tables and what fields are included. This would be a schema diagram. I've also identified some of the relationships happening. For example, there's the registration table, which is the user, has a unique ID that's created at the time that a record is inserted. It's auto numbered. And then that would match up to a foreign key over on the weight table. So this helps keep everything aligned and stores less data. So the next section is the algorithms and data structures. And for this, I'm going to go back to the registration activity file. And there's some sections in here under the Submit New Register button. So to back up, when the user hits that Create Account button, it will first run a query to insert the user, and that'll discuss in the database section or category. And then it will move to the Submit New Register button click method. That section is here. And what this is doing is first resetting some variables here in order to test that those fields were actually filled. One of the items that I need to go back and complete is adding in a reusable method here, a function that will check the password string is logical. In other words, it's not more than a certain number of characters. It has letters and numbers only, maybe one special character, things like that, typical checks for a password. That's why I would store the password field value here in a variable. Next, then I'm connecting to the database, and one thing to note here is when you're connecting to a database, you cannot connect to it from the main thread. You have to use a backend thread because you don't want to lock down your application if you have trouble with your database. So basically this would run in the background, and if you have trouble connecting to the database, it wouldn't affect the user on the main thread. The first thing it does, which will need to be modified, is it creates an object of the registered user, the user that was already inserted from the insert user method. And it's getting that user by username, which is not what I want to do because, first of all, the username, I'm not checking for a duplicate username yet. So when I make this call to the database, it's essentially pulling back multiple records, which I don't want. And in case the validation somehow fails on the insert and two usernames are entered with duplicate registration records, I don't want to pull back both of them. So I want to change this so that it uses the unique ID of the record instead of the username. But I will do once I've checked that there's not a duplicate username and I can pass that user ID back to this or get the user ID from the current registered user. So then moving forward, I do have some if-else statements in here, conditional statements throughout the application. This one is checking if that registered user object actually has data in it, and if it does, then it's moving on to the next screen, which is go to the daily weights. By doing it this way, I'm sort of, instead of just automatically going to the daily weights page, I'm just double checking to make sure that database record was actually inserted. You'll notice that my variable names are full words and not abbreviations. I use the starting letter of M because I'm referring to the main variable with that. That's just my personal preference. But it's good not to use abbreviations because everyone uses a different abbreviation and sometimes you don't know what it's referring to with an abbreviation. So this category of algorithms and data structures aligns with two outcomes. The first one being employ strategies for building collaborative environments that enable diverse audiences to support organizational decision making in the field of computer science. And that outcome aligns with this category particularly because with the use of correct data structures and algorithms, it essentially makes it very easy to pass over your code to another developer to complete their developer pieces. Normally, when you work in a software development field, you're working on a team, and the entire team is working on different pieces. So another developer can easily go in here and read what you're trying to do. I have everything organized so that I know the logical workflow based on my initial workflow diagram. And it pretty much follows in that direction where I'm inserting the user, I'm submitting the button, and I'm going to the daily weights page. This particular method is not being used yet. That's why it's grayed out, but I will probably be deleting that anyway. And then the second course outcome, is design and evaluate computing solutions that solve a given problem using algorithmic principles and computer science practices and standards appropriate to its solution while managing the trade-offs involved in design choices. So that outcome is established by all of the development points that I've just highlighted. You'll also notice down here, here, I am using a switch statement. And this is a good example of when it's best to use a switch statement, especially when you have any number of values being passed in as an argument. So for the options item selected, this is the menu item, and this would be the menu option that they're selecting, and each time they select it, it goes to a different screen. So a switch statement works perfectly because I can easily identify which option they selected and then write the code to go to the next screen. The third category of databases, I'm going to start over here in the database access objects. And in the registration object, you can see here that I'm building a few queries. Here is where I'll be adding in some additional queries. When I get ready to display the weights of a particular user, I'll need to add in a query here that will join those two tables together, because if I go back to my database design, I've got my weights over here in one table, my registered user here. So I'll be able to quickly identify those weights of that particular user by using the ID of that user. And I can either join, actually I don't necessarily have to join the tables together because I'm not displaying the information together. I can pull in the name and profile of the existing user with the ID, with that unique ID, and then I can also pull in the weights of that user with their unique ID and display that information separately. And I would do that here in the database object file. The model file is the file that is explaining all of the columns that I've created. It also has the set and get methods for each of those columns. Those will be used with the object that I would create calling this database item. That object then, I can use that object to get a particular unique ID of a user, and that's what those methods will be used for. I've also got other columns here. You'll notice here the update time. This is auto captured, so I'm just simply capturing a time when the weight was entered or updated, and that would just auto generate based on inserting the record. So some of the other database files here is just a configuration file to quickly identify which table refers to what. This user table is not actually in use yet. I'm thinking I don't need a user table right now. I have everything in my registration table, so that will be deleted later. I also have a initialized database file that just creates the database at the time that it's called in that main thread. So over on the register activity, under insert user, this is where I would need to add some additional checks for a duplicate username. Right now, I'm not checking at all if let me back up. I am checking for a username, but what I would rather do uh, is check for if the username exists. Then I'm creating some activity that would reconnect them back to the registration page. Right now, the error duplicate user method is simply displaying a message, and that is not actually working, which is why I have this to-do item. Additionally, I need to ensure that the password is logical and follows along with my requirements, and also maybe encrypted in the database. Encryption might be beyond the scope of this project, but it is something that I've noted and will look at before the end of the project. So the way this works is the database has already been initialized in that main thread. It's then running a call to the database in a backend thread, which is what you see here, where the executive service starts, and this is a backend thread. All the fields of the user entry are set into those variables that were connected into the ID of that particular user field from the front end. So I have all my variables here. And then I'm simply going into that database object file and running a query to check for the username. If that username does not exist, then I can move forward and enter the user. If it does exist, again, I need to resolve this error for the duplicate. I also need some additional comments here to explain what's going on. Right now I only have these to-do comments, so I'll need some more specific comments. There's no arithmetic computation throughout this application. There may be later on if I decide to calculate some of the weights that have been added, but for right now, there is no arithmetic. So the course outcome that aligns with the database category, the first one is demonstrate an ability to use well-founded and innovative techniques, skills, and tools in computing practices for the purpose of implementing computer solutions that deliver value and accomplish industry-specific goals. And one of the ways I plan to align to that with these enhancements is simply by adding the backend database. I'm using a room library, which is an internal database. So it's essentially stored within the same device of the user and can be recalled with the user. If the user resets their device, the database is cleared. But in this particular case, that's a simple way of being able to represent the different functionality of a database in a simple, easy way without needing any outside API connections or things like that. And then also value is gained when proper relationships are designed, and it ensures the least amount of data is stored. So back on my design here, by connecting these with the foreign key, obviously I'm ensuring that I'm not storing too much data. And then also I've build these relationships in a way that makes sense for the application. I have this goal weight table that I may have to uh, put on the backlog for phase two, just given the time constraints of this project. But this works in a similar way with the foreign key attaching to this unique ID of the user. And then the second course outline or outcome would be develop a security mindset that anticipates adversarial exploits in software architecture and designs to expose potential vulnerabilities, mitigate design flaws, and ensure privacy and enhance security of data and resources. So one of the ways that that outcome aligns with this project is going back here to the password section. Of course, making sure that this password is logical and specified, has those specified requirements, but also essentially encrypting it in the database would make it secure. Another item that falls into this category is ensuring that your methods are properly notated as private or public. In other words, your insert user method is private because you're only wanting this particular class to be able to access it. You don't want a hacker coming in from the outside accessing that class individually. So just ensuring that when you're working through your workflow and calling out these different methods as you go along, you want to make sure that the user, the intended user, is the only audience of that particular call. In this case, the insert user is private and could only be called from the internal application, not separately outside of the application. I would also probably add another check in here under the Submit New Register button to just check for the person who is supposed to be accessing the next page. In other words, is it the same registered user going to the Show Me My Weights page? And I think I've done that by including the actual unique ID of that user in the intent or the query string of the next activity, which is the displaying weights activity. So this concludes the code review of the Wait and See mobile application. Thank you for listening.